My name's Chris Williamson. I qualified as an architect in, I think, 1983 and went to work in New York for 6 months and then Michael Hopkins in London before establishing my practice with my college friend Andrew Weston.
Looking back, what would you say your early inspirations into studying architecture would be?
There's a long story behind it. I came from quite a religious family, and my dad, who died when I was 3, had been a lay preacher, and I think my mum wanted me to follow in his footsteps. So I went to church 3 times every Sunday from the age of 6 to 16, and I think the vicar expected me to follow in his footsteps and become the parish vicar. Study theology. I got a place at Leicester Poly to study graphic design. That's what I was interested in. I was interested in art. But then I picked up a book on architecture in the school library and thought, this is exactly what I want to do. It described what an architect did, and part of it, strangely, was the whole thing about caring for the community, not just doing what your client told you to do, but you had a responsibility for society to produce great buildings, not just for your client who is paying you, but for everybody. I ought to say from the start, I'm not at all religious now. I admire the people that have that faith. That sort of disappeared, unfortunately, when I was a teenager, because you learn different things, and I wish in some ways that I did have that faith that I had when I was 12, but life moves on and you can't make yourself believe in something if you don't. Yeah. But what I do believe in passionately is the power of design to improve people's physical well-being, mental well-being and spiritual well-being. So I feel like, in a way, that I've become an evangelical, but for design rather than for religion. So it's a long explanation, and I'm still as passionate about architecture now as I was when I picked up this book. And for me, it was a sort of revelation. Mark Twain says the 2 most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why you're born. And for me, picking up that book, it was like, this is what I want to do. Yeah. And I've never sort of doubted that. I think, like a lot of architects, it is a vocation, and that's supposed why we put up with being badly paid sometimes. And it is a bit like being a vicar. It is a belief. Yeah. And you think you're doing the right thing by being an architect and trying to make the world a better place, but through design rather than through religion. Yeah. Oh. That's my explanation anyway.
Would you say it was an easy conversation with your mom to let her know that?
She was actually great, actually. I mean, so I came from this really small village in between Nottingham and Derby, and because it was a small village and because my dad had died when I was young, there was a lot of pressure. Every conversation you had, I know most of the people in the village, and all of them were saying, won't it be great when you can leave school and get a job and help your mum, earn some money. She had to leave school when she was 14. You weren't allowed to have an education, especially women. So when I said I'm going to leave school, and I got a place at John Lewis, the department store, to be on their management program. And she said, I'll never speak to you again if you don't take this opportunity you've got, to go and study, because it's something that she never had. So lots of people were telling me to leave school and get a job, but she was the one that said, you've got to do this. So she was my biggest supporter. One of my biggest regrets in life is that she never lived to see me qualify as an architect, but that's life.
When you're not focused on architecture and design, what do you do?
When I was working at Michael Hopkins, I wanted to start an office cricket team. Most of the architects, like Richard Rogers and Norman Fosters and other people, played on a Wednesday night in Regent's Park, and I said to Michael, I want to do this competition, and if we win any money, buy some cricket kit. We came second in this competition and bought about 500 quid's worth of cricket kit. So we had an office cricket team, and it was great. And then one by one, all the architects got fed up of playing cricket, but luckily friends of friends started playing, and it was actually going for 40 years. We didn't have a home ground, but we travelled around anywhere around the M25, fantastic villages, and played cricket at the weekend. And we even went on tour. We went to Sri Lanka and the Bahamas, Barbados. We went to Italy and Ireland, Paris. It was fantastic. The great thing about it was because there were no other architects playing, it was a real chance to switch off at the weekends because nobody cared what you did during the week as long as you could catch a ball. You know? I mean, the only thing wrong with cricket is it takes so long to play it. So now I play tennis instead because you can have a match in an hour, 1 hour and a half, and it's much more enjoyable. But when you're so busy during the week and you know you've had a pressurized week, just to spend an afternoon out in the country, dressed in white, daydreaming for most of the time, but concentrating when you need to, was actually really good. I've always loved sport. I've learned a lot about business through sport, and still do, especially looking at various football managers. I think the way to motivate people, the way to put teams together is what we do in architecture, what we do in design, and I think that it's really, you can learn a lot from different things.
I've always wondered how it comes about starting like your own practice. Like, when did you decide this is the time? How did you know this was the right time to go about it, and how did you go about the process?
I think you're lucky in life if you keep meeting people that take you to the next level. So having an inspirational teacher at school. My art teacher, a guy called Dick Benning, taught me that you can do something, you can achieve something. And before, there's various people. My Sunday school teacher was one that, because I was fascinated by all the Bible readings when I was a kid, and all the lessons and all the stories, I still am. So people kind of instill in you a desire to learn and to make it interesting. I think you've got to be. There's lots of kids that never get that, and they never get somebody that has that passion and instill that passion in you. So I've been lucky to have decent teachers, and then meeting Andrew Weston at Leicester Poly, we were put together in alphabetical order for group projects, and that was just an amazing coincidence, and we found that we worked together well. So he was always he was more sure that we could do this and talked me into it. He went to work for Richard Rogers and I went to work for Michael Hopkins, but then in the evenings we lived close together. We would do competitions and projects, and we put them all together in 1985 for this exhibition at the RIBA called 40 Under 40. It got selected, and so we were alongside people like Eliza Morrison and Amanda Levy and Troughton McCaslam and Stanton Williams. We were just two young guys that had put all that stuff together, and the president of the RIBA at that time, Michael Manser, said, how long have you had your own practice? I said, well, we haven't. He said, well, you should do, just give it a go. And he kind of talked us into setting up our own practice, and at that time we weren't earning very much, and we just thought, well, if we can earn whatever it was, 10,000, if we can earn £10,000 in our first year, we can match our existing salary. We just tried, and that's, I suppose, what we've been doing ever since. You never know how it's going to work out, but we managed to sort of grow slowly throughout that time. So, having people around you, that's sort of why I want to do this job at the RIBA, because I think young architects need that sort of help, and they need to be able to see people and have that sort of encouragement, not necessarily to establish their own practices, but just to, I've had as much enjoyment in my career mentoring young people and watching them develop as I have from the projects that I've worked on. I've got nothing else I want to prove to myself. What I would like to do now is to make sure that the architecture profession is in a good place for young architects coming through.
And What would you say has been your most interesting project you've worked on?
Great thing about architecture is you wake up in the morning and often, usually, you're doing something different. You know, there's projects at different stages. So you can get up in the morning and you'll either be starting a design or you'll be hassling with builders about the detail on site or something. But it's always different. But I can't think of anything that I haven't enjoyed. But and it's surprising. Some of the projects, some of the smaller projects, like I to be honest, I haven't had the career that I thought I was going to have. I've done more sort of management probably than I thought I would do, and I've done more infrastructure projects. We won in 1990. We won the project for the Jubilee Line station at London Bridge, and after that we got a lot of repeat business for that kind of work. And I've enjoyed every minute of it, but I always thought I would have more variety in the sort of projects that I did. One of the smaller infrastructure projects was the East London line, which is now the Windrush line. And although it was one of the smaller infrastructure projects, it was built on some old Victorian infrastructure, and so there was a lot of refurbishment work as well as some new work, and the budget wasn't very much, but that project had a really great effect on the whole of that east end of London. And when you look at the development on the Kingsland Road and how it's built new communities, that's what makes me really proud, is being associated with those kinds of projects that have transformed parts of London and tied communities together and created new opportunities.
Very socially driven.
Yeah, I think to me that's what architecture is all about. It's not necessarily about great landmark buildings. It's about, you know, how you're going to improve. Those city shaping projects are really important.
With regards to architecture education, there's always been the notion that it's either too long, too tasking, or very exclusive. With you at the head of the RN, what changes would you look into for younger architects who already feel excluded from the system?
It's very important to me. Architecture wasn't something that was suggested to me when I was at school, because it's sort of a profession. They don't sort of encourage working class kids to become part of the profession. And it was only when I picked up this book called Your Architect, which was published by the RIBA, and it described everything an architect did. I went to my careers officer and said, you know, this is what I want to do. And they tried to talk me out of it, said, well, you've got a place to study graphic design. That's what kids like you do. And I persisted, and I begged Leicester Poly to let me study architecture instead. But I think that, and we have so many kids in our office that come from Southwark and Tower Hamlets, and they haven't, you know, again, they're not taught about architecture, they're not given that as an option. But when they come to the office and they see the graphics, they see the models, they see the computer renderings, do I do this? Yeah. And you just say, well, this is the way you do it. So I'd like to make sure there's different routes into architecture for people that can't afford them. And I was lucky at a time when your education was paid for. Now it becomes incredibly expensive. So we've got to develop alternative routes, apprenticeships and lifelong learning to enable kids to be able to do those sorts of jobs. It's not just architecture, it's lots of things that aren't suggested to. You've got to find out what sparks people are. Everybody is interested in something. But if they don't know about it, they don't know what the possibilities are. So I'm passionate about lifelong learning and being able to curate your own career. And I was talking to somebody yesterday who works for a robotics company, and he's working alongside architects. Have switched from architecture to doing robotics because it's the same sort of parametric modelling that they were doing working for architects. So I think studying architecture is a fantastic course. You don't necessarily have to finish being a fully chartered architect. You can have a fantastic career, but unless you're given the opportunity to start it and told about it, you've got to give people those options and make sure that we encourage people. So one of the things I've been doing this summer is writing a children's book about architecture, about a group of animals in the forest. that need a new school, and it's the Lions convinced the council that they need to employ an architect. So I think the earlier you can get people interested in architecture and then get kids curious about what an architect does, because nobody really knows. I didn't know what an architect did until I was 18, and nobody had ever told me that the job sort of existed. So I think getting people interested in architecture, both at school, then their parents would become interested in it. As architects, we're not very good at that. We're taught to design. We're not great communicators, really. And I think getting people interested in it as soon as possible is what I would like to do.
With regards to climate change and the notion that all designs should be somewhat sustainable, how would your presidency ensure that these ideas are actually taken aboard by practices?
It is the biggest challenge we have at the moment. When I was young, I thought technology was the answer to everything. I watched Neil Armstrong walk on the moon when I was 12, and I thought technology is going to solve all the world's problems. Now, I have no interest in going back to Mars or going back to the moon. We've got so many problems here on this planet. The idea of going and trashing another one seems to be totally wrong. At the time, I thought it was amazing. I thought, and we learned a lot from it. But I think we've got to put the same amount of effort that we did in John F. Kennedy wanted to go to the moon. And that was sort of one man's mission in a way. Climate change takes a lot of countries to collaborate, and politically that's a lot more difficult. But I think as architects, we have to keep making sure that we're telling that story. And strangely, the reason Andrew and I got together at college was because of an interest in sustainability. I won a competition in 1970s when it was the first sort of energy crisis. The oil producing countries banded together and the oil price went up, and everybody thought, right, we'd better do something to conserve energy. So there's lots of architectural competitions and lots of talk about saving energy, even 40 odd years ago, 50 years ago. So I won a competition which was run by Tarmac on energy conservation, and Andrew won a more glamorous competition judged by Norman Foster about a house design, a house of the future, which was a low energy house. So the problem's been around for decades, but now it's getting really serious, and that we have to keep trying to get that message across on sustainability and convincing our clients. When we started up our own practice, it was very difficult to convince clients to build sustainable buildings. Even clients that want to do the right thing, we were trying to say to them, you've got to put in triple glazing, but if the developer down the road is only putting in double glazing, and that means their flat is going to sell for £5,000 more, they're going to be at a commercial disadvantage. So I think the best way of doing it is to lobby for changes to regulation and legislation, because everybody has to do it. You can't leave it to individual choice to do it. So I think that's what we should be trying to do as a profession.
With regards to student voices, how do you plan to ensure that the student voice is not just heard, but actively integrated into the IRB's strategic decisions and initiatives?
The current president, Maiwa, has done a great job in making sure young architects have a voice, and I want to continue that. Maiwa is going to continue his work that he's already started. But to me, we've got to get it right for young people. We've got to listen to what they have to say, because they're the future of the profession. That's why I'm interested in doing this. The RIB has been really good throughout my career. First of all, getting us started as a practice, but also giving us help and advice along the way, and also introducing us to the ability to win work abroad, which is really interesting. And now, I think like most professional institutes, there's a danger that it's not as relevant as it used to be. When I was younger, the RIB was It's where you went to for all the best talks, exhibitions, lectures, competitions, awards, even an annual conference. It was something that you thought, this is a great institution to be part of as a young architect. So I think nowadays there's so many different outlets that people have, either online or in person. There's a lot of activity going on in the old street, furniture showrooms and things, having talks and lectures. And we have to make sure that the RIBA is seen as part of that and is lively, more energetic, more enthusiastic, and involves young people. Otherwise, it's going to lose its relevance to young people.
You mentioned the RIBA in a way losing, I guess, essence of what it was before. What would you suggest could be done to elevate the status of the RIBA and also architects in society?
The two major concerns, which I think go hand in hand, is low wages and low fees and how we can increase our work. And the other one is low esteem or low representation to politicians and decision makers. I think you need to do both. So lifelong learning to me is a way of proving that we are continually improving and getting better. And I'd like to see people to be able to curate their own careers throughout their lifetime, so that you do lifelong learning, so that if you want to specialize in conservation or AI or BIM modeling or heritage or management, you do the modules that are applicable to you, not make every architect do the same study. So that doesn't mean to say you have to do that for the rest of your career, but a block of 2 years, you would do one thing. In 5 years' time, you might want to do something else. But having a specialism in architecture, in our case infrastructure, has really helped, because you can demonstrate that you've got a real skill. If you're competing with every architect in the country for something, it makes it really difficult. But if you're only competing with a smaller number, it makes it a lot easier, and then you can sell that specialism around the world. So being able to have a specialism within architecture, as a young architect, it allows you to go to another employer and say, look, this is my block of qualification, and I can do that job. And so you can shop around more if you've got a specialism, I think. And then you can get better clients if you've got a specialism, if you can convince them that you know more than the guy down the road. So I think it's really important to have a specialism, and then being able to prove that you've done the learning as well as having some experience. And then we need to get better at convincing politicians and decision makers that we are specialists. And one of the things I've tried to do, well, I have done, I've had the first meeting already, to have a sort of shadow cabinet of architects. So when the Labour cabinet was announced, I mapped out a specialist architect for each ministry, get them close, so we're better represented with politicians and decision makers. I think we need to get out more, we need to be more visible, and we need to send the right people to the meetings to convince politicians that we might not have all the answers, but we have a lot of them, and we should be consulted more.
These are really good plans. I'm really eager to see how they play out.
So am I.
If you were to give advice to young architects who may want to start their own practices in the future, what would you say to them?
I mean, as I said, you learn a lot. If you listen to people, they are really good at helping. I think architects are a fraternity, and they are willing to help. And the best bit of advice would be to ask people. I didn't do enough of that. I waited for people to offer advice, and I was quite lucky that they did. So one of the best bits of advice was actually from Michael Manser, who was the president of the RIBA. His wife was a journalist, and she said, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? I said, well, we don't know. We don't have any clients. She said, well, you can do your own projects. That's the great thing about being an architect. You can dream up your own projects, and you can get your work out there. And these days, with social media, there's so many more outlets for things, but then there's so many more people doing it. But what Andrew and I did was we made up a project and submitted it to the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition. It was for a laboratory building. We made up a client, we made up a site, and we just did all these drawings and made a model, and it was accepted for the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition. And then a journalist, wrote an article about it, So we completely made it up, and then we got a client out of it. Because we hadn't got any work and we hadn't got any contacts, we tried everything. So there was a laboratory exhibition in Manchester at the GMEX Centre, and we were the only architects there. We just stood there for 2 days with our project for this laboratory, and this guy from English China Clays in St Austell commissioned us to do a feasibility study for their new laboratory. Didn't go anywhere, but at least you thought you were getting somewhere. So I think you've just got to start. You've got to believe that it is going to work out, and often it didn't, and you get incredible disappointments when things don't go ahead. But somehow we just kept going, and I think you've got to just try and get started and show what you can do. And that, it doesn't always work out, but it often does.
What is an unpopular opinion about architecture that you have?
I don't like the way that it's sidelined. I think politicians don't look at, every time I listen to the news, whether it's prison reform, whether it's the National Health Service, whether it's school design, everything to me comes back to design. And I think we would save a lot of money as a country if we stopped throwing money at problems and started throwing money at solutions. So people ask, what would you like to design if you could design anything? I'd love to design a prison, strangely, because I think prisons are now at the moment designed to, all they do is encourage people to keep reoffending rather than being designed well. That goes for schools and hospitals. I think we probably should have more research to back up savings that we would make by having creating better environments and saving money in the long run. So I think more representation at the decision makers, the best developers and the best clients seem to understand that, and that's why you get building areas like King's Cross where we are now. So I think it's a great environment, really mixed use and works well for everybody, but we've got to make that more of the norm.